All right, hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue, welcome online or in person to Concordia University's fourth space. Thanks so much for joining us for Moving the Landscape to Find Ground with today's special guest, Zinnia Naqvi. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube right now, live from fourth space located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And we'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we're meeting on today, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating and producing daily activities. And today it's our pleasure to welcome Zinnia back, this time live in person into Fourth Space for this presentation and conversation. And to say a few words about this series of post-image events, it's now my pleasure to pass the floor to Hannah Klaus. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Sego Sewagwegu, Hannah Klaus Yanjuts. Greetings to you all. My name is Hannah Klaus. I'm the co-director of Post-Image, an assistant professor in studio arts, and visual artist of Kanien'kehá:ka and English ancestries. As Kanien'kehá:ka, I prefer to do a welcome to the territory as opposed to a territorial acknowledgement, since this is my home territory. And generally in my welcome, I give some fun facts, such as the Kanien'kehá:ka are one of 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The Haudenosaunee translates to people of the Longhouse, which is the ancestral structure within which we live. And metaphorically speaking, the Kanien'kehá:ka are known as the people of the Eastern Door, because within the territory, our nation is the one that is at the east, and the Longhouse continues through over to the edge of Lake Ontario. So I'm very happy to welcome you to the second to last iteration of our year-long speaker series, Moving the Landscape to Find Ground. Before introducing our guest, I'd like to acknowledge the financial support of the Office of the Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies, the Faculty of Fine Arts, the Indigenous Faculty Research Center, the Black Perspectives Office, the Milieu Institute, the Feminist Media Lab, and Daphne, Tiohtià:ke's Indigenous Artist-Led Center. I'd like to say a big nyankoa to our intrepid team, Pedro Barbachano and Sierra Barber, as well as everyone here at Fourth Space. Thank you for hosting us. Zinnia Naqvi is a lens-based artist working in Tkaronto, Toronto. Her work examines issues of colonialism, cultural translation, language, and gender through the use of photography, staged images, written word, and archival material. Recent projects have included archival and restaged images, experimental documentary films, video installations, graphic design, and elaborate still lives. Her artworks often invite the viewer to consider the position of the artist and the spectator, as well as analyze the complex social dynamics that unfold in front of the camera. Naqvi's work has been shown across Canada and internationally. She's a 2022 Fall Flaherty Colgate Distinguished Global Filmmaker in Residence and recipient of the 2019 New Generation Photography Award, organized by the National Gallery of Canada. Naqvi received a BFA in Photography Studies from Toronto Metropolitan University and an MFA in Studio Arts from Concordia University. She's currently a sessional lecturer at the University of Toronto and the Toronto Metropolitan University. Welcome. Welcome to Waradu.
Hello. Thank you so much, Hannah Klaus, for having me and for introducing me. And I also really want to give a big thank you, well, for everyone. First of all, in the audience, thank you for making the time. I know it's a really busy time in the semester. To Pedro Barbachano for his incredible work, and to Deanna Bowen, the directors of Post-Image Cluster, for inviting me here. I was very recently an MFA student as part of the program, so it's really nice to be back. And also just be able to kind of see the school alive again and see people buzzing around making work. It's really like just a lovely treat for me to be back. So thank you again. I guess I can start. I'll just share my screen. Whoops. So I just get that out of the way. Okay, so we're all good with, I guess, flag me if there's any screen sharing problems. So yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this incredible program. With alongside people like Greg Statz, Rahab Nazal, Tina Compt, Michelle Pearson-Clark, Shelley Nero, I'm really honored to be part of this lineup of artists and thinkers that I look up to and who also inform my practice. I know that we did a land acknowledgement, but in honor of the the title of this program, Moving the Landscape to Find Ground, I also wanted to actually read an excerpt from my thesis, which kind of started off. I wrote a long thesis text, and so I thought it might be a fitting time to kind of share it with you all. So that's how I'm going to start. So I have conflicted feelings towards land acknowledgements, as there's been much discourse today as to if they're considered an empty gesture for the delivering party to alleviate their own guilt or feel as if they're taking a step towards reconciliation. I choose to include the land acknowledgement because what I like most about them is their meditative potential. The gesture might be empty and futile, but it does also help to shape our minds and constantly remind ourselves of our encroachment and our privileges as settlers. Métis scholar Chelsea Vowell explains, if we think of territorial acknowledgements as sites of potential disruption, they can be just transformative acts that to some extent undo Indigenous erasure. I believe this is true as long as these acknowledgements discomfort both those speaking and hearing the words. The fact of Indigenous presence should force non-Indigenous peoples to confront their own place on these lands. The work that I'm going to share and talk about today involves sites that exist on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe-Weki, and currently I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation in Tkaronto, Montreal. These lands have been nurtured by a diverse group of people with distinct customs, languages, beliefs, and traditions, which have been and continue to be persecuted by the Crown and government of so-called Canada. I do not consider myself an activist, but rather an artist who hopes to poke holes and draw lines through my experience as a child of immigrant settlers. In this work, I don't seek to provide answers, but simply ask more questions. I hope that pointing to my own position and implication in the colonial project can be a step towards forming new insights and actions. Perhaps it's still very gestural, but as we ask these questions, we encourage more people to question, and every little push can make a step toward lasting change. So those are just some thoughts I kind of wanted to start with as I get into speaking about my work and my practice. So a lot of my work really starts with the family album. It's something that I kind of started working with at the very beginning of my practice and my career. I've used my family images as well as images of my friends and my community members, colleagues, and to highlight personal effects of migration. I often employ reperformance for the camera as a tool to process or embody larger historical artifacts. Other times I use personal family imagery to highlight larger political themes of class, nationalism, citizenship, and gender roles. So this first project I'm going to talk to you about, some of you might be familiar with, so I thought it would be a good place to kind of start. It's titled Yours to Discover. And as I mentioned, a lot of my work does start with the family album. This project kind of started when I was actually invited by a Toronto-based art collective called Sad Art Store to respond to the theme of being a tourist in your own home. And I started to think about, when we think of tourism, who usually visits sites, and it's visitors to Canada, but also people who are new immigrants to Canada. And something that my dad used to say when I was growing up is that he likes to live in every country as if he was a tourist. And so I started to think about that kind of phrase that he said and how, so because I often start with working with family images, a particular set of images that I decided to start to work with was images from when my parents and my sisters, before I was born, actually came to Canada in the late 80s and visited as tourists. And they had some ideas of potentially wanting to move to Canada, but they used this trip as a way, almost kind of a reconnaissance mission of sorts, to kind of see what Canada is about and what if they could see themselves living here. So I started to look at the specific set of imagery and looking specifically also at 3 sites that they visited from this particular trip. So the first is Niagara Falls. And what I was interested in was thinking about Niagara Falls as a site where you learn about, it's a famous tourist site in Canada. You come and it's kind of supposed to be representative of this like vast, majestic, untamed landscape. That's the lore, I guess, of Niagara Falls. But as anybody who's, visited recently, it's also a highly sort of manufactured. It's kind of like little Canadian Las Vegas now. So that's the way that has also been sort of commodified. I was interested in as well. The second site that I was interested in looking at was the CN Tower. So the CN Tower, was built in the 1970s, which was also at the height of Canadian kind of multiculturalism. There was a big push towards multiculturalism, and a lot of people like my family were sort of encouraged to come to Canada and think about the economy and contributing to the economy. And so these are the things, so, thinking about the CN Tower as this almost like symbol of the Canadian advancement in engineering. So that's what I was thinking about, these larger political themes when thinking about the CN Tower. And the third site that is less known, but that I was interested in was this site called Cullen Gardens and Miniature Village. So this was a site that doesn't exist anymore, but it was located in Whitby, Ontario, which is just outside of Toronto. And this is kind of a funny one. So it was a garden, but it had this miniature model community. And so as you can see, I took images from these different trips, and kind of I have the central image in the center of the composition. And this one was also a funny one because it's kind of like, if I imagine myself in the place of my family, it's like they're looking at this miniature model community. And this is not like the community that they grew up in or they lived in Pakistan up until this point. But it's almost like a museum of the everyday. It's like, okay, this is a suburban housing complex, and this is the kind of place where we should maybe be living and like looking to buy a house. So it almost kind of looks like they're shopping for a house in this image. And then ironically, I ended up growing up in a suburban housing complex that looked very much like the mini ones in this photo. So just thinking about like them in that place and like going to these sites that are like determined as tourist sites, and then what are they learning about how they can see themselves in Canada and fit into the fabric of Canada from these places. So obviously I was thinking a lot of like very complex political heavy agenda things, even though these photos are, family vernacular photos. And so I was kind of like, how do I translate all of my thinking really to the audience? So I created these still life compositions in my studio, and paired other kind of excerpts from the family album, some research materials, and toys and games from the same time period that the photos were taken. So in this image, which you also saw, Settlers of Catan, it's a game about, it says it all in the name, right? So it's about, showing up to this place in which it's this kind of untamed resources are available for the taking, and you go and you kind of try to basically mine the land to use the resources and make settlements. And there's no talk of like who was there before or what was there before. And that is what I feel like Canada was like advertised as I think it still is to a lot of people really. But definitely at this time period, it's like, this whole potential of to come and to find new prosperity in this new place where everyone is allegedly on equal playing field, but we know that that's not actually the case. So I'm directly kind of implicating my family into the project of what is Canada by inserting our family images from Niagara Falls within the board game. And I don't think a lot of this, of course, when they moved was not conscious, but now that I am conscious and an artist who's practicing and thinking about these things, I'm, very just wanting to question, like, what is my place? What of how is the system that we kind of moved here, based on specific acts, how has that benefited me and also harmed other people at the same time? So those are the questions that I'm asking in these works. Same with Monopoly is, it's about buying property. It's about being able to afford land and property and being able to pass that down to your next generation as well. And that's how generational wealth is also accumulated for people. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of the cities that we live in from now on. So just by taking these simple games that we're all familiar with, I'm trying to ask very loaded and complex questions. And also I think a lot of us don't even think about this necessarily when we're playing Monopoly and Settlers of Catan, but it's like they're also embedded in these games. And this is also how we learn things when we're kids that then become part of our adulthood as well. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about in these works. This photo is kind of a funny one. So this is an excerpt at the back. You see this image from Cullen Gardens in Miniature Village. So there's a cop car that stopped a sports car in the back. And I was interested in a lot of things. First of all, it was probably my father who took this photo. And I was wondering what made him take the photo in the first place? What was he interested in? And also if this, this community is kind of meant to be a model utopia. Ideally, it's supposed to be, happy, harmonious community. So then why is there a need for policing there? And what are they also trying to show with policing and thinking about the way that, cop toys and police, this kind of paraphernalia is also marketed to young kids as well. And then directly thinking about the role of policing in border patrol and nation building and nation maintaining as well. So those are the kinds of parallels I'm trying to make. We're bringing in little excerpts from Monopoly and from my research and all of these things. So using the kind of book titles and the research that I bring in as sort of entry points for those connections that I'm trying to make. So as I mentioned, I also wrote a collection of essay that really kind of lays out a lot of the thinking that I'm discussing here. And just because that's also an important part of my process is as an artist, I do all this thinking and then it feels like it needs to go somewhere. So that was something that I did for the first time in this work. And something that maybe I'll do again, but it was very generative for me to have that out in the world as a separate piece. And so the first time I showed this work was for a public project. This was at the Peel Art Gallery Museum and Archives in Brampton, Ontario, which is a very sort of new immigrant, predominantly South Asian immigrant area. And this was a public project and there was actually a park across the street. So I also wanted to bring in things like toys and, make these very bright, colorful images to appeal to families so that people could kind of relate and, relate to the family images, the experience of visiting these sites. But also you then have to, well, you don't have to, but also there is a lot of sort of loaded and more difficult thinking that I'm bringing into the images as I pair different objects together. And I've had the opportunity to show these works in public settings a few times. So this is from the Broadway City SkyTrain station for a Capture Photography Festival in Vancouver. And just seeing the way that the works have been, responded to in public realm has been really generative and exciting for me as well. Because they are often very sort of large, dense images, it's really nice to be able to appreciate them on a larger scale and relate to them in a different way that way. This is from an exhibition of the works that I had at Pierre-François Ouellet in Montreal last year, I think, or 2021. In which I also, I've kind of branched into playing with window space as well in these works. So this is an image from Cullen Gardens in which my sister and my dad were kind of behind the fence, whereas there was this playground or this amusement park in the front. And I wanted to create a kind of separation between the idealized fun and then who gets to have the fun, who's watching the fun happen and who is being able to access the fun and make kind of a separation between the two there. These are another exhibition, just installation shots. So I've kind of changed the way that you relate to the work based on the different settings that I've had the opportunity to show them at. Okay, I'm going to go into another body of work now. So I had the opportunity to have two overlapping exhibitions. I think it was the winter of 2021 over 2022. And I created two new video works, and as well as some text work. So as much as I work with my own family stories and histories, that also does become quite loaded after a while. So I started doing, actually, when I was at school here, a sort of parallel practice in adjacent to my lens-based practice and to my photo and video-based practice. So it's a text-based work that I've made that's called I Just Have a Lot of Feelings. And sometimes I use this work that I'm making as a way to almost sort of express the difficult feelings that I'm having around making work that is like often citing own family trauma, or like just dealing the like weight of trying to deal with personal history in my own work in a way that feels like I'm trying to kind of like market it for a larger settler like white audience. And so the way I kind of started making these works and thinking about these works was just thinking about like the way that we talk about our feelings on social media. So sites like Twitter, you can create a phrase that is, just a few characters, but then has this sort of like resonant meaning with a lot of people. And so this was a way for me to kind of just take out these uncomfortable feelings that I was having about my work, and also just be able to put them somewhere visual in relation to the actual work that you were seeing. So this is a piece that I usually display on the ceiling, as you can see. So usually you have to stand under it and look up to read it, which is kind of disorienting. And it says, "I can tell that centering myself is making you uncomfortable." So just thinking about how, I'm often talking about my own personal position, family position, and my own place in the world, and sometimes being so open and vulnerable, I think is sometimes looked down upon also in the art community. So I wanted to kind of address that discomfort in this piece. This is another piece that's appeared as vinyl on the wall, which says, "Having my face on your walls is not proof of inclusivity." So just thinking about the way artists of colors are often invited into spaces to perform certain, adhere to certain diversity quotas, but often, the people who are then working within those institutions or the structures or established, the way things are run in the institution are not always very supportive of change or at the supporting, BIPOC workers and things like that. So I wanted to make something that directly addresses that, like just having work in the actual gallery is not enough. We need to start to talk about these systems and change that we, and their problems with them, and how we can try to push towards change. So that's something I wanted to address in this work. That's the close up. This is a mirror text piece that says, "I don't know how to not exploit my experience." That is something I'm still thinking about. Just trying to kind of really air out these, I'm often talking about my own experiences, and sometimes it feels like I'm almost like self-exploitating them in a strange way. And all I can do is try to address these uncomfortable realities, really, and try to point at them and work through them with my audience, really. So that's kind of the idea with having these works there. And then I created two video works for this exhibition that are, one is called "The Translation is Approximate" and the other called "Farzana." So "The Translation is Approximate" is a film which so it's based on a trip that I made to Pakistan, where my family is from, in 2014. And in this trip, actually, I was kind of talking about, I was at the end of my undergraduate degree, and I was really trying to, again, reconcile my own identity of like going back to this place where my family's from, but I don't really have a relationship with, and trying to be an image maker. And something that really always kind of affected me about being from Pakistan, being in Karachi, where my family is from, is the class disparity. And so something that I witnessed when I was there was a kind of uncomfortable situation between my aunt and a domestic worker in her home. I stumbled upon a really awkward conversation between the two of them. And because I was quite young at the time, for whatever reason, I actually recorded this conversation. And I have, I think, a screen grab here from the conversation. So I actually came to do my MFA to try to wrestle with this work. So in the conversation, the domestic worker is asking my aunt for help because a family member had stolen from her. But my aunt is, looking not very sympathetic. And it turned out that she kind of didn't really believe the story that was being told to her. And it ended up with a large kind of kerfuffle, and basically it turns out that she was being lied to. And it was a really complex situation, but also something that I think really illustrated the kind of complexities of class and domestic roles within the home and trust between women that I was really also interested in. So I struggled to figure out how to talk about this work. And so I ended up making two films based on this situation. One is called The Translation is Approximate, and I'll show you a clip from this film now, if I can actually. I guess I'll stop sharing and reshare. Let me know if the sound works. I was wondering if it's okay if I... Sorry, that was the wrong one, but it's good that it's working. Huh. Okay. Okay, great.
The person you don't see in this image is me, the camera person, who has the privilege of being out of the scene, but simply witnessing. I have the privilege of being able to step away from this situation, because I can shut the camera off, I can shut off the monitor, I can end the scene.
So this is just a really short excerpt from this film, but in it I show the footage, and I also really implicate my privilege and my place as camera person, as a person who's witnessing the situation between the two women. I'm coming in as a total outsider. I'm judging both of them. I empathize with both of them at certain points. I, am also suspenseful or suspicious of both of them at different points, but I'm also trying to kind of implicate my place as spectator, as someone who's coming in. I'm essentially a foreigner also, and like really playing judgment on these two people, and really I'm trying to kind of really just lay out all of the different complexities of my position in this kind of experimental documentary. And then I went on actually to then, in wanting to kind of dig deeper and really talk about all of the different layers of this situation that I didn't get to visualize or to get to actually witness. So I made a 30-minute narrative film called Farzana. Farzana is the name of the woman who is the domestic worker in this situation. And so Farzana is based actually in North America. So it's two women who are in a North American suburb, and one is a woman who works from home. She's a psychotherapist, and she hires someone to help her take care of the house and take care of her kids. And similar sort of things happen where she starts to distrust the worker. The two of them empathize. They're both immigrants, so they both migrated to North America at different moments. They both can kind of relate to each other's story, to relate to, being women in the home, but then also are sort of distrustful of each other at different moments. And then there's a me character. So I directed the film with a friend of mine named Zinnia Naqvi, who is an actress and filmmaker. And then I am also, you see the situation through my lens as Zinnia, the niece of the woman who is in the situation. So I'll show you the trailer as well from that film. Film you? while you're folding the laundry?
Right. Well, I'm looking for someone to do, general housekeeping. You see, I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach, and I run my practice from home. And beyond that, I have 2 small children who can keep things rather busy, as you can imagine. Oh, not to mention, this extra one right now, she's just on her summer vacation.
Hey, Nasreen.
Hello.
I was wondering if it's okay if I film you while you're folding the laundry?
Me? It is hard work. I never thought I'd be doing this kind of work. I went to school for literature back home. But when you move here with family, you must do whatever you can. Oh, hello, Miss Charmaine.
Oh, hi, Nasreen.
Is everything okay, ma'am?
Yes. It's just that this is my home, okay? And I have enough going on with work and the kids, and I need someone who can help me with this and not be a burden. I know things are hard right now, but I'm sure things will start to look up soon.
I really hope so, miss.
Go back to my slides. I'll just go back to here, yeah. So in this film, we're put in a place in which we're constantly questioning who we trust, who's telling the truth, who's jumping to conclusions. The film is meant to leave viewers to reflect on their own circumstances of how they would behave, how they might react in each of the characters' situations. I think events like COVID and a lot of events in our recent just society, things that we're dealing with, have shown us how divided our society is, especially by class, whether that's in North America or in many other places around the world. So I wanted to kind of use this as an opportunity to think about what do we do when we don't have social infrastructures to rely on, when we're in a situation in which we need help. We rely on those around us, but what if they're willing to help? The Zinnia character takes on the role of the witness who's piecing together little bits of information that she gathers with her character, and the entire film takes place within the context of a single domestic home within the North American suburb, again, kind of like with the other project. So just snippets. I also wanted to kind of complicate this idea of the North American suburb because I think for a lot of people who immigrate to Canada and the US, it just feels like this is like, a place in which nothing bad happens. And it's kind of, it feels like, I think, I grew up in this is literally, so I took snippets from where the neighborhood that I grew up in, where my parents still live. And I was thinking about like just, I kind of really didn't like growing up in this neighborhood because it felt very boring to me. And I didn't understand for a while why my parents would choose, after moving from a city like Karachi, to live in this very boring suburb. But then it kind of made sense to me that they felt like in the mundaneness of this suburb, they felt like a sense of safety and security in it. And I wanted to kind of disrupt that as well, this idea of the ideal suburb, and just to talk about all of the complications that can happen within the home. So that's that work. And now I'm doing okay for time, right? Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about actually some brand new work that I have not spoken about and have not shown yet. So exciting. So let me know what you think. So this past year, I was working with an organization called Mayworks, which is a festival based in Toronto. And they are a labor arts festival. And they have a program called Labor Arts Catalysts, where they pair artists with a different labor organization. So I was selected and applied to work with the organization called Asian Canadian Labor Alliance, which is a grassroots collective of community and labor activists. They work within the labor movements and within Asian communities to raise a profile on Asian Canadian labor issues and support Asian Canadian activists in leadership roles within the labor movement and within communities. So they're not affiliated with any specific trade or job, but rather to support people from Pan-Asian communities within the larger labor movements. So when I was selected to work with this organization, they actually gave me basically an online database or an archive that had been compiled by a researcher named Lokchi Lam, and she had done quite a bit of research for the 20th anniversary of this organization. So the organization kind of started in the 2000s, and two of the founding members, Chris Ramsarup and Winnie Ning, found out about a similar organization in the US and then went on to start ACLA. And so Lokchi Lam, who created this, I was really in a really privileged position, and this was a very new territory for me. So I was actually working with material that wasn't mine for the first time, and with an organization. It wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't say an institutional archive, but like definitely more of an organizational archive. And I wanted to include this slide because Lokchi had initially actually proposed 5 mini-series, which didn't end up working out, but they divided their research into these 5 categories. And one of the ones that kind of stuck out to me was this number 4, which is called White Fear on Campus. And they were looking particularly at different instances of anti-Asian racism on Canadian campuses, specifically in Ontario. And so this is, so there's 4 events that I was looking at in this project. The first one, and there's some screen grabs from the incident here, was called, so in 1979, there was actually a CTV News special called W5 from the program W5, which still exists. And it was called Campus Giveaway. And this TV special gained a lot of negativity and traction because basically it was a very racist news segment saying that the place of a lot of Canadian students was being taken by international students, particularly Chinese students who were taking the place of students in medicine, pharmacy, and dentistry. And then this was factually not true, and they took, video footage from within classrooms within pharmacy and dentistry showing, that there was a lot of people who looked East Asian in these in the classroom, but a lot of the students there were actually Canadian born and Canadian students. So there was a lot of just factually incorrect things. And so a rebuttal was commissioned by the Council of Chinese Canadians in Ontario. And so that was one of the instances I was interested in. So in this project, I've kind of returned to creating these large still life compositions and return to working in my studio. But as I teach part-time, my studio is often also my office. So the project is called The Professor's Desk, and I've created these compositions within my home office / studio. So there's excerpts from images from the event in question. So this one is about the W5 campus giveaway, as well as, again, my sort of research materials and excerpts from the news segments and different sort of props that also indicate towards the thinking that I'm doing in relation to these larger events. So one of the other events that really stuck out to me in this research was there was a very dynamic case about a professor named Kenyep Chun, who was a professor at the University of Toronto from 1990 and into the 2000s. So he was a professor in seismology, and he actually sued the school for racial discrimination because he kept basically going up. He was hired as a research associate and kept trying to go up for tenure track jobs within the school, and then kept getting kind of denied entry into the competition, and for various resources. And of course, his superiors were telling him like, oh, well, you just weren't with the right fit and things like that. And so he actually ended up taking his case to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. Let's see if I got that. And yeah, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which backed his case and also said that there was a poisoned work environment and cronyism and the dynamics of an old boys club's networking operating in these job competitions that he was working within. So when I found out about his case, I was really inspired. I was like, wow, like, I think a lot of us people who have worked within university settings have experienced, maybe what we might call, discrimination or like microaggressions or different sort of uncomfortable moments within the workplace. And I think that's a very relatable feeling. But to then actually take it to court and to really bring it up to the level of making it a public case was really kind of amazing for me to hear. But then there was a report published on Professor Chun's case in 2003. And when I read that report, I just realized how bad the situation had to get for him to actually have to take his situation to court and to get that, really, really public kind of support. He also got a lot of support from students of the time. And it was, a case that really kind of completely changed the direction of his life. Also, when he received settlement from the school, the people in his department started treating him with more animosity and excluding him from meetings and things like that. So this is an image that you'll see where he actually he was sometimes shut out of meetings and then would show up in kind of protest and with signage from his other colleagues and students to draw attention to what was happening to him. So in this project, I'm thinking about the position of Professor Chun, and I'm an adjunct lecturer. I'm a sessional lecturer at the same school that he used to teach at. And I guess preface this by saying that I've had a lot of support in all the places that I was a student and all the places that I teach at. I felt very supported in all of these places, but I also am really thinking about what came before me, who had to struggle to make this place for me that I am able to see myself in now, and who had to really fight for there to be places. And now we're seeing a lot of deliberate calls for diverse hires and things like that. But this case it's not that old. It was from the 90s to the 2000s. So a lot of struggle had to happen in order to make places for people like me in these institutions. And so I really wanted to think about that in this project. So I've made, again, these kind of compositions in which, in these images particularly, I'm putting myself in the place of Professor Chun and trying to think about in the trajectory of his public case, his actual research got really sidetracked. So he was a seismologist, so he studied earthquakes, and he's a physicist. And I wanted to, in this image, draw homage to also his work, his struggle. He was a father. He was he went to all the right schools. He did his PhD at Berkeley, and he went to Columbia, and then he went to U of T. He got all of these amazing fancy degrees. He was very accomplished. But then you get to a certain place and he still had to face all of this adversity and not really able to flourish the way that he would have liked to. So I wanted to think about that in this composition. So this image is titled Before the Settlement, Professor Chun's desk. So I wanted to think this is kind of I'm setting it up almost like a film still, as if, he's starting to get into the middle of his case, but not quite there. And then this image is called After the Settlement. And so I wanted to think about when the case started to take over his life. And it was extensively covered in the media. So there's a lot of articles from the Toronto Star and from the Globe and Mail that I was able to find and print out, and just think about how the case also then started to kind of take over his personal life. And his desk starts to get unraveled. There was also something that I read in his case in which at one point he was put into an office in a faraway building that had cockroaches and vermin in it. So that's the reference to having I brought, little roaches in there to kind of reference that, but also just this idea of like, taking over and the unsettlement and just the discomfort of trying to really talk about these really uncomfortable moments within academia. So these are two images. They kind of function as a diptych. And I am having an exhibition next month in Toronto. And so these two images will be on a window front space, particularly. So those are, thinking about just like, I wanted to, as I said, sort of pay homage to his struggle. I think the case really kind of took over his life in a lot of ways, but I think it made space for us to have these conversations. And I'm actually going to be having a public conversation with Dr. Chun, Professor Chun at that for the exhibition. So I'm really excited about that. And just to be able to, it's been 20 years later, and I hope that we can, have some kind of productive conversation about what his struggle meant and how we can move forward. And hopefully we are in a more different place now, but it's important to talk about it. Another event that kind of came up from Lokchi Lam's research and during this whole time was this, I don't know if anybody remembers this article from 2010 that was in Maclean's magazine. So it was called Too Asian, and it also received a lot of flack and protest because basically the article was talking about how Canadian students don't want to go to schools like U of T because there's too many Asian students there and they don't party and it's not fun for them to go there. So they work too hard and it's too hard to get in. So, and it was obviously also very racist. So this is the article. And then there was actually a book published in response to the article called Too Asian. And this is the cover of that same article. And you can see the kind of person they put on the cover, but also just thinking about the way that we also are, schools are advertised to students from all around the world, and we're, supposed to be making these welcome and inclusive spaces, and often the marketing materials are made to reflect that. But are those students actually being supported when they get here? Are they actually, given the tools to succeed or to stay in Canada or to get jobs? Often not. So that's something that I wanted to kind of think about by bringing all of this imagery together, again, within my sort of desk space. And this is a series of, again, posters that I actually just collected from the schools that I teach at. And it was just to kind of also highlight the contemporary moment of like what students are dealing with, and especially thinking about international students. So I was interested in this, I think I've seen them around here too, the WISE Prep and just the phrasing of the students like you with the Uncle Sam kind of slogan text that they're using to, and then also there was just so many, calls for tutoring and things like that, but then also like stress, like a lot of mental health studies, just posters for that. So I think like just like kind of a way to visualize like what's on the mind of so many people who are facing a different kind of adversity here within campus. And so that's what I'm wanting to kind of bring all of these events together to think about the moment that we're in, and so that is all for my talk. But wait, I had some final thoughts, I think. So as I kind of mentioned, I do bring all of these things together, all of these kind of complex pieces of information, snippets of information, newspaper articles, events, excerpts. I'm really trying to constantly complicate and push and pull my position as camera person, as artist, as maker, as settler, as researcher, and bring these different events from different moments in history into conversation with each other. And sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's clean, sometimes it's very complex and a lot to kind of talk about. But I just feel like that's the format that I've found in order to have, these conversations of a lot of events in history, especially with this most recent work that tend to cycle. And, I'm talking about something that happened in 1979, and then the 90s and the 2000s, and then now. And a lot of these things, although they're 40 years apart, they're not that different, and they keep happening again and again. And I think it's important to think about what has changed, what hasn't changed, by creating space to kind of almost elapse time within the space of an image or a video and all of that. So that's where I'm at with my research practice. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. No, it's really a pleasure. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Do we have any questions either here or on Zoom? I think Anna's kind of controlling the Zoom side of things. I thought I'd take the microphone and help pass it around if people have questions here. I have a question if no one else does. I just was curious. I was really appreciated you saying you're going to have a conversation with
Professor Chen.
With Professor Chung. I thought that was like great because that was my question. But I guess my question still remains with maybe how much when your research does kind of focus on people either that you know or you've sort of come across like this and you're really doing a deep dive. How much do they get involved in what you're doing? Do you go and interview them as a part of the process? Did you just happen to find out he was still here and would be interested in having a conversation? Has he seen the work? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So really good question, and it's a real challenge every time. So this was the first time I was working with archives that were not mine. So usually, and that's something I really think about, and the reason I do often use my own family archive is I do feel a certain like agency and like, okay, I know the people, I know who took this photo. I really have a lot of like hands-on contact with the people involved, and I do talk to them during the process. But this case, I wasn't sure if he would want to talk about it, right? So, and this was a semi-public archive. So the way I kind of went about it is like everything that I've used in the images, they're all like, very public newspaper articles and images that were published in newspapers. And so I did actually go ahead and I talked to Lukchi Lam, who was the researcher, and Chris Ramsarup, who was actually a student at the time of the Dr. Chun case and protests. And so I spoke to people who were around at the time. And then I actually, after I kind of made the photos, I then chose to reach out to Dr. Chun because I didn't know if he'd want to be involved and like want to kind of, talk about the case. So I then, I was like, but okay, I need to, of course, if I'm going to have a public conversation, I should invite him if he wants to be part of it. So then I reached out to him over email, and we've been corresponding over email. And first he was kind of tentative. Then I sent him the photos. I'm not sure if he fully understands the photos, to be honest, but I was kind of like, they're not meant to be historically accurate. Like, I'm just trying to pay homage to like your struggle.
I'm an artist.
I'm an artist. I know you're a scientist, so it's very different. I had to like look up what seismology was before I started this project. But now actually, like first he was kind of like, okay, I can be on Zoom. Now he's actually interested in coming in person. So I think it's a way for him to maybe, again, 20 years later, be able to open up the dialogue. And he seems very willing and interested in speaking about it. So I'm really happy that could happen. We're still trying to figure out how the format, but I'm really happy that he's
that's really great. That's kind of exciting. Like,
yeah,
I wish I could come to Toronto.
It'll be hybrid no matter what. So I'll
great.
definitely share. Yeah.
Send us maybe on your website.
Something. Yeah,
Something.
I'll email it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's going to be part of Mayworks, actually, if you want to follow the Mayworks programming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll check out Mayworks.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. There's hands in the back.
Hi. Thank you so much for your work and your talk. It was really amazing. Your photos reminded me a lot of the tradition of the
That's okay.
Cabinet of Curiosities, which has a lot of roots in like colonialism and like the kind of gathering of objects to prove like mastery over something. I'm wondering how you try to maybe like go against this, or if you have any tactic to resist this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought about it more, I guess, when I was making Yours to Discover, because that was my first time working with still life, and I had never, and this very much felt like, just thinking about like, the history of like still life painting and like Dutch vanitas, and it felt like such a genre that has such a prolific history that I almost never really actually wanted to be part of, because it just feels like very almost in contrary to what I do, or just very different from what I do. But then I guess it was just a way for me to make a space within one frame that talks about a lot of very complex ideas. And it's kind of interesting that I am making these very, like, when I was younger, I didn't make such like photographic photos that are very like, you know, still lifes, that they're very, there's this like tension and they're very like precise in a lot of ways. But for me, I guess I feel like the mastery now, it just feels like a way to kind of like draw importance to what I'm talking about and to these histories that are not always spoken about. So yeah, so that's kind of just the way that I've been working in this realm. But it does feel like very, in some ways I'm like, I can't believe I'm making work like this now, but it's working for me at this moment. So I'm going with it. Yeah. Yeah, Stephanie.
It's funny that you bring up the Cabinet of Curiosities, because actually the still lives, and I've seen a few of them, but they always remind me of the I Spy books. And to me, that's quite clever, because they're images that, anyways, I used to pore over a lot when I was younger, and there's like all kinds of things to discover in them. And to me, that's like an invitation to an engagement, which is really, can be productive.
Yeah.
But my question is more, I wonder, I really like the desk images, and I feel like I like that you've come back to the still lives, and I feel like it's really bringing kind of the desk work back in a different way. But I wonder if you can talk maybe a bit more about maybe the importance of narration for you. I see it in the still lives kind of as you pointing the way to your viewer, but of course it comes out a lot more in your film work. So yeah, how do you feel about using narration in your work?
I mean, I think in my video work, it's definitely something I come back to. Like, I think with like the translation is approximate, and even like other film works that I've made, is like, it's almost like a release. It's like a way for me to like just talk about my process in like a very sort of like raw way, and like give that information to the viewer. With the photos, it might be a little bit more opaque, but I think in that way, like, that's something I've kind of realized is like, that's when like beauty and like visual interest can draw people in a different way. So maybe you don't have my narration, maybe you don't know all of the parts of the story. Obviously, you don't know them unless I tell you, or you read the case. But you know, just drawing people in with the visual and with the lighting and with the color and the palette, and just like making them want to spend time with the images. I hope that that's how they can be drawn in on their own. Yeah.
Zinnia, we have a question online, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Varda.
Hi, Zinnia. It was so good to hear your presentation and to see your work. And I do have a question. And maybe it comes from my own position as a person from Pakistan, and this debate always being in the background that, you know, should we settle here? Should we not? Or do we return? What we do? So in the photo album thing, you kind of centered this idea of indigenous communities and the settler project. But I also felt that the voice of your family and their own aspirations and running away from Pakistan in a context that is highly life-threatening for certain people, and almost that was kind of silent. And I want to understand how do we balance that? How we as viewer understand that silence that I felt, but also kind of to place it within the larger context of Canada, where there's a strong anti-migrant or anti-immigrant stance right now, right? So how do we understand this, all of that together? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Like, I think that I have addressed that in other works, to be honest, in which I didn't have the chance to show today. But I honestly think I'm trying, like, each new work or each new project, I'm trying to reconcile with different parts of my identity. So as much as I try to talk about many, many things in each of the works, I think that is completely valid. And like, you know, talking about just like all of the difficulties of leaving is like, I think that is something I've done in other areas. So I think it's really just about like, yeah, being able to talk about the complex, but then bring it in different, different areas when it makes sense. Like with Yours to Discover, I have had the privilege in which my parents were leaving a lot of a difficult situation, but they did choose to leave. They weren't refugees. So I was thinking about this act of them choosing, and that's unique to my experience, right? That's not everybody's. A lot of people don't have a choice, and that's like completely how, they end up in different places. But because they had to leave behind a lot of really difficult and a lot of violence as well, but they did make that choice. And they actually also had the privilege to leave, right? Lots of people don't have the economic ability to leave, especially today. So that is something that I was really trying to talk about in this work. But yeah, in other cases, I've talked more about different parts of that experience. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That kind of connects to a question I had just about and this is maybe just me, I maybe missed what you said about it. The hexagonal shaped board game.
Settlers.
Yeah. You invented that? Or
No.
it's an actual game that exists?
Yeah. Oh no, it's a very famous game. Yeah. It's like a really popular board game. It's like the new Monopoly. Yeah. It's I actually did write about it. I'll give you my text.
No way. She must have invented that.
No. It's a big game.
Okay, I want to see this now.
Yeah, because I wrote it was made by this German game maker. I don't have his name here, but I wrote about it in my text. And he created this board game. And I was also inspired by, there's another artist named Golbo Amani, and they created a board game that's called Unsettling Settlers of Catan, and it's like an expansion pack to the actual game to talk about all of the problems basically with the games and how to rethink the construct of the game. But no, it's like a super popular board game.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that. Yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Were there any more questions?
I think Alice Jim has a question on Zoom. I can read it out.
Sure, I can bring it. Okay, sure. Yeah. Hi, Alice. As the impact of BIPOC faculty cluster hires unfolds somewhat unevenly in universities across North America, do you have any thoughts about how the myth of the model minority continues to have a negative impact on faculty and students of particularly East Asian descent? How might your work resonate with your own experiences? Yes, thank you, Alice, for that question. I was directly thinking about the myth of the model minority when I was making this work, and I should have probably mentioned that. And it resonated, again, when I kind of read Professor Chen's case, like it really resonated with me because, he did everything right. Like he went to all of the fancy schools, he got a PhD from Berkeley, Columbia, U of T, like everything he did according to what is allegedly the right path. And, but then you're kind of kept at this level in which you can't actually get the tenure job and you're like just under, like you're not quite secure. And yeah, just thinking about this idea of like, you take all the right steps, but then you're never really able to get into that place in which you actually have power, or I'm sure as many of you know, even if you have power, but the system is trying to keep you in your place and you're not actually able to execute your power. I'm sure many of, you can relate to that. And I'm not like, again, I'm like very I'm lucky and I've been really supported in all the places that I have worked. And I'm not just trying to like cover my back by saying that. I just want to be honest, like this isn't really coming from bitterness, but I question that too. Like I think we all know that this system of targeted hiring is also super problematic and is pigeonholing people in different ways, but we haven't really figured out necessarily the right system. I know different schools are trying to do it in different ways. And it's just like a new evolution. And I think like each evolution, hopefully we're trying to get better, but there's still lots of flaws in the evolution of trying to change the system. So I'm just trying to like question all of that as I am also teaching and functioning within the system, if that makes sense. Let me know if that answered your question, Alice.
I don't really have a question. Well, it's kind of like a question, but it's more like a comment. I never saw that story from Maclean's magazine that Asians don't like to party and that's why we don't want to go to school with them. I'm like, who are they interviewing? I mean, like, why are these people in university? I don't get it because it sounds dumb. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there was also recently another title in, I think, is it the Wall Street Journal, that also was basically the title of the article was also too Asian. And so it's like also this rhetoric is being kind of repeated over and over again. So, but yeah, it's just like also, you're right, why are we going to school? Like, are we not here to study or, yeah.
And like I too experience discrimination because I am Indigenous. I'm Algonquin. I'm from Kitigan Zibi. But like the way when I hear that in university, I changed my total opinion about what I thought about university, what it was going to be like, that it's this big high place where there's super smart people there, but there's actually a lot of dumb people. So yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And I think, again, it also goes back to like, you know, do you fit in? Can you make jokes with people? Like, can you, you know, make the same cultural references? Like all of that also, it shouldn't matter, but it does a lot of the time. So I think it plays into that too. Yeah.
Do we have more questions on Zoom? No? Okay, well, before we say a big thank you to you again, I want to mention, since I've got people here and on Zoom, I just wanted to mention that we will have our last speaker, Caroline Monet, Algonquin artist, photographer, filmmaker, visual artist, on April 25th. And I'm mentioning it because I know like a lot of you are going to be like, out of here, but come on back for that because I think it'll be pretty great. And to top it off, we're going to have some fantastic Indigenous catering for a reception for the closing aspect of that gathering. So we would really like it if you can spread the word to your friends and come on out for Caroline's talk on April 25th. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Zinnia.
Thank you so
really
much.
Great talk.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
Thank
much.
you for having me. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Zinnia, so much for your time and for coming into For Space, and all of you who've joined us here live in the space. Those of you online, thanks so much as well for joining us in that space. We're going to close up now and, as Hannah said, welcome you back to the next and final iteration of this project in late April. Bye, everybody. Have a great evening.